Well, guess what? We are at the end of a sermon series. And if you're just joining us for the first time today, you haven't been a part for the other weeks, it's okay. I will calm your fears right now. You will just be able to jump right in to what we're talking about. The title of this series has been The Worlds We Create. And we've been talking all about the different worlds that we create in our minds, which then shapes how we live life. I was trying to think about, well, what is the best way to end this series? And when I mapped it out a couple of weeks ago, I had one idea, then I had another, and then I had a third idea, and I scrapped all three of those ideas, and I decided to go with this for the final sermon of the worlds we create. And I realized that of the three sermons that I scrapped, they will find their way, those ideas, into sermons at some point in the future. But for today, the title of this sermon is Faulty World Creation, otherwise known as The Weight of Expectations. Who has ever felt the weight of expectations on their shoulders before? Yes, all of us. Now, here's where this sermon comes from. I did an interview this week for my book with Casey of WHUD, if anyone listens to the local 100.7 WHUD, which is such an odd thing for me because I grew up here in Somers and I listened to Casey all the time in the morning, especially back when I was going to school. I didn't have the internet that you could check to see if your school was closed, so you actually had to listen to the radio, and you had to wait until the 30-minute mark, so 7 o'clock or 7:30. And Casey was always the voice on the radio of WHUD. And she has a podcast. It's a spiritual podcast. We had an interview this week, and we were talking all about expectations. Because what I've realized with expectations is, for me, this book that I have coming out, it's a personal memoir. It's my journey of beginning a church, what I've learned along the way, some of the insights, some of the wisdom that I have gained through the years. One of the ways in which I was living, which was unhealthy, was through the expectations of others or unhealthy expectations that I was placing on myself. As we were talking this week, I realized this is something that we all, I don't know if suffer is the right word. It does feel like suffering sometimes when there's those hefty expectations you have on you. But expectations is something that we all struggle with. What are the right ones to have, and what are the unhealthy, the burdensome expectations that we carry with us? And so that's why I titled this sermon, Faulty World Creation. I think a lot of the reason why we find ourselves, and this is true for me, the reason why I found myself at a place of burnout was because I had created an unhealthy world in my head. And then I was trying to live into this unhealthy world. I hit a spot of burnout, as those of you who were with me 2017 know. After 2017, when I was forced to take 2 months off from work, from speaking, I had to relearn how to live. And that's a lot of what this book that I have coming out is about. What led to my burnout, and then how did I relearn how to live in a healthy way that produced joy and purpose and a feeling, walking through life with a feeling of lightness. Because there was a heavy feeling upon me in the beginning here. And that's what just led to me crashing and burning. And expectations, faulty expectations, was one of the reasons why I hit a dead end. The title of this sermon then, Faulty World Creation. Then how do we correct some of those faults so that we can live into a healthy way, a way in which Jesus is leading us to live? I think one of the things that Jesus did is he corrected some of the faulty world creation that his listeners and us as readers of Jesus and readers of the gospel struggle with today in our lives. Let's begin with a Jesus story. I think it's always a great place to start with the story of Jesus, how Jesus lived, how he taught, and then how he is teaching us to live life. We said our vision here at Awaken is to create followers of Jesus. So we look to the life of Jesus in order to discern how we are being called to live as followers of Jesus. This story takes place in John chapter 11, verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus has been elsewhere. Now he arrives into a town, and as we'll see here, the people are expecting him. They have an expectation upon him, but Jesus doesn't fulfill this expectation. On his arrival, Jesus found his good friend Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Lazarus, his friend, has been dead for 4 days, and then Jesus shows up. What do you think everyone in the town would have been feeling at this point? Everyone who knew Lazarus. Let's say that you buried a good friend, a family member, 4 days ago. How would you be feeling? You'd be grieving. Yeah, there'd be this sadness that would pervade the household. Now Jesus walks into this. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. Many Jews had come to Martha and Mary, the sisters of Lazarus, in order to comfort them. So friends are coming to comfort them in their loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, because that's how Martha is. We all have a friend who's Martha, that impulsive friend. And then we have the opposite in Mary, but Mary stayed home. She needed some space. She needed to grieve. She needed to be with her loss. And we all deal with loss and grief in different ways. Martha rushes out. How does she greet Jesus? Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That phrase right there, it's very telling. It's very weighty. Chances are, others have spoken that phrase over you at some point in your life. If only you had done this, if only you had not done that, if only you had helped more, if only you had said this, if only you had not said that, if only you had given more of yourself, if only you had been here. You ever felt the weight of someone else's expectations upon you? You walk into a situation, someone calls you up, someone sends you a text, and they say, hey, if only you had done this, things would have been better. If only you hadn't said that, we wouldn't be in this mess right now. Here's the truth about life. You will have all sorts of expectations placed upon you by others and by yourself. Normally, the expectations that we have placed upon, that we place on ourselves, they come from those external voices. The messaging, as we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks, the messaging that we pick up about how we are supposed to live. There's a certain message swirling around in the air, and it's almost as if we are being forced to live into that messaging. So throughout life, we will all have all different sorts of expectations placed upon us. Expectations like, you should be like this. Have you ever had a parent say this to you? If you are a child, have you ever had your parents say this to you? I do this to my kids. I have to correct myself. Okay, hold on a second. Let's not mess them up too much. I think that's the number one goal in parenting. Hopefully don't mess your kids up too much, so they have to go to counseling to deal with it 15, 20 years later. What about this? You need to be more like him. You need to be more like her. Have you ever heard phrases, ideas spoken over you like this before in your life? And then you walk through life, and it can feel a bit like this. There's all these expectations that you're just assimilating into your being. She says this, he says that, your grandmother says this, your father says that, your friend says this, your teacher says this, your friend, coworker, everyone, and the next thing you know, you can barely stand up straight because all the weight of it, if only you had. Maybe we should have called the sermon that. If only you had. And here's the truth. You can all fill in the blank of what's been spoken over you about if only you had done this. Maybe that's the homework this week. Grab a journal right at the top. If only you had, and then all those expectations, just write them out there so that you can see the expectations that you're living with. Because normally, if we don't make room and space and time to really sift through and think about the messaging that we're carrying with us, This is what happens. We have a giant box. We don't even realize that there's another way to live. We don't even realize there's a lighter way to live. So we need that awareness. We need that space to think, if only I had, what am I living with? Here's what we see in the story of Jesus in John. Jesus was okay disappointing people. He did it here in this moment, but this wasn't an isolated occurrence. Matthew chapter 8, verse 18. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, why is there a crowd around Jesus? Because he's healing people. Because he has words of salvation, of life. There's something about his teaching. People are coming to him because they want more. They want to be around him. They have an ailment and they think, if only I can get around Jesus, if only I can be in front of Jesus and have him speak to me, well, I might be healed. People are hearing about Jesus. They are waiting in line. They are pushing in. They are traveling a far distance because Jesus has something that they want. And what does Jesus do when the crowds push in around him? He tells his disciples, hey, let's get in a boat and let's cross to the other side of the lake. In other words, hey, I need some space. I need some time. If you, it's probably a pastor thing, but if you're in ministry, there's this messaging, there's this expectation, and this is one of those unhealthy expectations that I was living with. You must always be available all the time for others. What do we read here with Jesus? The crowds there's a need. And fulfilling needs, helping others in their need, it's a really good thing. Can we all agree about this? But sometimes you got to take care of yourself. Sometimes you need to let go of the other's expectations, and you need to get in a boat and cross to the other side of the lake with your friends. And you got to throw back a couple with your friends. Here's the crowds pressing in because people desired something from Jesus. And he's like, guys, I'm tired. And here's the thing about what we read here in Matthew. Again, this wasn't a one-time occurrence for Jesus. Whenever the crowds would push in, Jesus would often escape to be by himself. Jesus was only walking the earth doing ministry for 3 years, public ministry for 3 years. And yet how did Jesus spend a lot of his time? In solitude. Prayer, recharging his batteries, taking care of himself so that he had something to give others. He knew if he kept going and going, if he lived into the expectations of others and what they always wanted, that he would burn out and that he would have nothing left to give, that he wouldn't be able to fulfill his calling, the mission that God had placed upon his life. So what we see about Jesus is true about you. And if there's one thing I want you to remember from today, I think it's this slide. It's okay for you to disappoint people. Can we all just take a breath for a moment? I mean, the wisdom in this. What's it? 6 words, 7 words, whatever it is. But maybe some of you need to hear that this morning. It's okay for you to disappoint people. If it was okay for Jesus, it's okay for you. Now, I have a picture of a boxing ring. 2017, when I went through my season of burnout, I went to go see a counselor to talk through some of the things that I was wrestling with. And after a couple of conversations, he goes, it feels like you're shadow boxing yourself. You're tiring yourself out in a ring, and it's like you're fighting an imaginary opponent. You're fighting all these expectations that you're carrying around with you, but honestly, like, no one else is placing them on you. You're the one who's doing it to yourself. I think sometimes we are the most critical of ourselves. We hear these external messages, then we internalize them, we live with them, And we place all these unhealthy expectations on ourselves about how we should be. And the truth is, no one else is placing them on us. Maybe they are, like there are those others' expectations, of course, but sometimes we can be the ones who do the worst harm to ourselves. And I had to think about that for a bit. I had to sit with that. Okay, you're shadowboxing yourself. How am I tiring myself out? What am I telling myself I have to be like? And then what can I leave behind? What can I leave here so that I can actually walk forward into a new way of living? Some of you are shadowboxing yourselves this morning. You've placed others' expectations on yourselves, and they've forgotten about those expectations, but you're still holding on to them. And they're shaping everything about the world that you've created in your head. And here's the truth about when you're shadowboxing yourself, when you're living into these unhealthy expectations. Here's what will happen to the world that you've created. It will shatter and explode because that way of living is not sustainable. And we get these expectations that we internalize from the culture. There are particular cultural spirits that are swirling around. They're particular to geography, to the places where we live. If you've moved here from somewhere else, Westchester has a different feel than Buffalo. I went to college out in Pennsylvania, in western Pennsylvania, close to Pittsburgh. I remember I thought that I had moved to some different country there the first week I was in Pittsburgh. I was like, why are people moving so slow here? I grew up here in Westchester my whole life. I went to a Rite Aid like that first week of school. I'm like, there's two people in front of me, yet it's taken 45 minutes for me to get through this line. Don't they realize I have places to be? I have things to do. Everywhere you live, there are particular cultural expectations. We internalize them, and then we think that they're normal, and then we create an expectation for ourselves about how we are supposed to live. The programming that you receive as a child, the programming that you received growing up, it shapes your world. I mentioned this last week, I just finished a biography on Cary Grant. And when you read about his childhood and what he went through in his formative years, he carried those truths with him the rest of his life. And they didn't always shape him in the best ways. That's why it's so important you get a journal. If only I had, what are the expectations that you have internalized that are forming the world that you are living? And is the world going to break and shatter, or are you living into a sustainable way of being? A couple years ago, I came across this verse, which has deeply, deeply shaped me. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 30. Before the Israelites enter into the promised land, Moses is giving a sermon. He's telling the Israelites, this is how you will follow God. This is how you will know how to be the people of God in this land that you are inheriting. Here's the wisdom that Moses offers. Now, what I am commanding you today, the way in which I am inviting you to live, it's not too difficult. It's not beyond your reach. It's not up in heaven so that you have to ask, well, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so that we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea so that you have to ask, well, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? He's saying it's not out there. It's not within the larger cultural wisdom. It's not too hard. It's not beyond your grasp. Where is this wisdom that will help you live into the person that God has created you to be? No, the word is very near you. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart. It's within you. I came across this verse and it changed everything for me, because so often our minds, our inner world is shaped by external sources, external voices. And we even think God is somewhere out there. And if I can somehow find my way to God, if I can work my way to God, then I will discover godly wisdom. Then I will find the Spirit somewhere out there. But what is Moses saying? The Spirit is within you. The wisdom that you are looking for, there's a divine Spirit within you that is leading you and guiding you to the wisdom that you need for your life. Sometimes we make it so difficult. If I were to do this and jump through this hoop and go here and talk to this person, then I would find the answer. But Moses is like, hey, hold on. No. That's exhausting. That's not going to create a good way of living. The wisdom that you're looking for to obey, the wisdom that you need to follow Jesus with your life, it's in your heart. It's within you. So for me, how do I discover this wisdom? How do I discover what are the healthy expectations to live into? Follow the example of Jesus. Solitude. Listening. Silence. Getting away from all the other noise and all the other messaging that exists in our world. Sometimes you need to turn the phone off or on airplane mode. You need to silence the notifications. You need to turn the TV off, pull the earbuds out, and you need to get away so that you can listen to that Spirit. You need to read through the Gospels, read the teachings of Jesus. You need to connect with God, just you and God, no other voice that's there in that moment with you. No, you don't need to ascend to heaven. Who's going to cross the sea? No. The word that you need to obey, it's within your heart. It's right there if you would listen, if you would be silent. Now, this obviously raises a question, which is, well, if I'm not supposed to meet everyone's need, if I'm not supposed to live into others' expectations, if I'm supposed to go and be silent for a bit, well, does that mean then that I become a self-centered, self-serving narcissist? That I don't care about anyone else? Because, of course, this question will be raised. I mean, think about Jesus. When he escaped, the crowds were coming. Who knows how far they traveled from? He goes across the lake. Don't you think there would have been some people that would have thought, what a jerk. What's he doing? Does he know that I flew in from Alabama and that he's not even sticking around to heal me? That he's not going to even speak a word over me? I came to hear a sermon because I heard that his sermons are amazing, and now he's leaving? There would have been some people that would have said, wow, not the person I expected. Let's answer this question in a way that Jesus answered the question. Here's Luke 24. After the resurrection, Jesus is traveling on a road with two, you could say, former disciples, because they've sort of given up. They had followed Jesus, but they didn't like where following Jesus led, because following Jesus led to the cross. It led to a death. And so they thought that this person that they had been following for so long, that he was a fake. They had poured everything into following this path, trusting him, and then he goes and gets himself killed. End of story. They are depressed. Then they are on a road walking with Jesus. It's late at night, so they say, hey, stranger, because they don't recognize Jesus because they're downcast. Their eyes are staring at the road. They can only see their pain. But they invite Jesus into their home for a meal. They say, stranger, friend, it's late at night. We don't want you to get robbed. Why don't you spend the night with us? They're at a table sharing a meal together. And when Jesus was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. In that moment, their eyes were opened and they recognized Jesus. And then he disappeared from their sight. What was it that opened their eyes? The breaking the giving thanks, and then freely giving that bread, because this was what Jesus did with his life. Think about his body on the cross. His body was broken. His blood was poured out for the healing of the world. So for us, this is the example that we are called to emulate. We take bread, we give thanks, we break it, and we freely give it out. What does this look like in a practical way for us? We live in a world that is transactional. You do this, you expect to get this in return. You go to the store, you buy bread and bananas, you give the cashier your credit card, you give them some cash, and there is a transaction that takes place. There are all different types of services. Someone works in your house, in your apartment, you pay them for your work, or for their work. This is the dominant way in which our world exists. There's a transaction that takes place. You give something to get something. But the way of Jesus, it's not a transactional way of viewing the world. It's a Eucharist way of viewing the world. It's Eucharist living. It's breaking and freely giving with no expectation of return. This is how Jesus lived his life. This was Jesus on the cross. Jesus knew there would be people who would follow him. There also would be people who would hear his message and they would choose to walk in a different direction. They chose not to follow what Jesus was offering. Jesus lived with no expectations on others as to whether they received or if they walked away from his message. So for us, how do we give from the healthiest part of ourselves? Well, we have to love and we serve this world. We serve others from a place of health and joy. How do we do this? We ask ourselves a question. Think about this bread. And actually, hold on one second. I forgot to bring the bread up with me. Imagine your life as a piece of bread. What is the gift that your life can offer others? The best of yourself. What is that? What does it look like? How have you been gifted? The passions that you have within you. The things that break your heart when you look at them and you wish, I wish someone could do something about it. Well, that someone is you. So think about your life as a piece of bread. It's an odd illustration, but think of it. Work with me here for a moment. What's the gift that you and only you can offer to this world? And then, like Jesus, you show gratitude for your life. You show gratitude for your breath. Jesus took the bread, he gave thanks. You start from a place of thankfulness. Thankfulness for the gifts that you carry within you. For grace, the gift of life that you have freely been given. And then, like Jesus, you give of yourself. You break the bread. You pour out your gift. You pour out your energies. You pour out the best of who you are to the world, to love and to serve. It starts from a place of gratitude, and then from that place, you leave the expectations of how others will receive the gift that you're giving, and then you repeat the process. After you freely give, and you're drained, because that's how it works. That's what happens. When you love and you serve, you need a day on the couch. You need a day in the woods. You need to put yourself back together. That's what Sabbath is all about. You go for 6 days and you take 1 day to recreate yourself, to rest, to be poured into, so that then you can go and pour yourself back out into the world again. So you take the gift of yourself and you reattach it. You find out what fills your cup. And then you start all over again. Gratitude. Pour out your energy. Break your life open for the serving of others. You freely give with no expectation. This is the example of Jesus, and as followers of Jesus, we are called not to a transactional way of living, which creates resentment and bitterness and unmet expectations when others don't respond to you how you expect them to respond to you, but rather it's this Eucharist way of living, which is, this is my gift, and I'm going to live into this, and I'm going to love and serve, and I'll heal the world as I give of myself. But you don't force anyone else to respond in a particular way to what you're giving. Now, as we close here this morning, what I want to do is I want to celebrate Eucharist, which means good gift. Greek word good, charis, meaning gift. Eucharist, what we do on a regular basis here at Awaken is we remember the good gift of Jesus that was broken and poured out for our healing and for the healing of the world. This practice centers us. It reminds us we have been freely given a gift of grace. And then we are now called to live into this way of being. What we'll do here is we'll sing another song together. We'll have the bread. We'll have the cup. You can come forward. You can take the bread. You can take the cup and be reminded of the good gift of Jesus that's freely given for your healing, for your salvation, for your life.